All right. So we'll go ahead and get started here today. Thanks everyone for joining. I know I still see some folks are joining as we go along here. But we're going to go ahead and get started in the interest of time. So let me go ahead and share our presentation to the screen so everyone's keeping up with what we've got here. All right, so good afternoon. I'm Justin Buttress, and I'm the Administrative Rules Coordinator for the State Forest Division. I have with me today Mike Wilson, State Forest Division Chief, Nick Palazzotto, the State Forest Division Deputy Division Chief, Colleen Kaiser, the State Forest Operations and Planning Manager, Vanessa Petro, the State Forest Lead Wildlife Biologist, Eric Moberly, the State Forest Aquatic and Riparian Specialist, and Tyson Weprick, our State Forest Adaptive Management Specialist. The focus of our presentation today is sharing background and summary information about the draft Western Oregon State Forest Management Plan. Today's session is an informational session only. We won't be taking any public comment today. This session is being recorded and will be available on YouTube. Our goal this afternoon is to provide a bit of background, add some context, and provide clarity on the draft forest management plan. We'll go through our presentation and then try to answer as many questions as we can following that. At the top of your screen, you should see a Q&A button, and that will allow you to write out any questions. There's also a raise hand button that will put you in the queue to ask questions at the end. Questions and comments made here will not be considered part of the official rulemaking record and are not considered public comment. Please hold any comments, critiques, criticism, or statements about what you like and don't like about the FMP for public comment. We have 4 public hearings upcoming to take that sort of comment, and comments may also be emailed or sent via postal mail. Details can be found in the rule filing notice or at the link that's provided here at the bottom of this page. I'm also going to drop that into the chat here in just a moment, and it was also emailed to you when you registered for this session. At the public hearings, we will not be presenting information and will not provide an opportunity for questions and answers. So today we're going to start by providing details about the policy context and framework for the Forest Management Plan, along with the rule and FMP requirements. Then we'll provide details about the contents of the FMP itself, chapter by chapter. And finally, we'll cover the steps we're taking to adopt the Forest Management Plan. After our presentation, we'll have time to answer some questions. So I'm going to go ahead and hand this off to Mike Wilson to get us started on the background. Oh, we lost Mike. Okay. Oh, sorry about that. Looks like Mike is back with us now. I was going to go ahead and get us started, but I think he'll be able to hopefully here in just a moment.
Thanks, Justin. Sorry about that, everyone. Just having a technical difficulty here. Thanks. Again, thanks everybody for joining us today. Now, before we get into the details of the draft forest management plan, I just want to provide some framing and context for its development. So ODF manages state forests for the greatest permanent value to the state, which is defined by law as healthy, productive, and sustainable forest ecosystems that over time and across the landscape provide a full range of social, economic, and environmental benefits to the people of Oregon. To secure the greatest permanent value of these lands to the state forester shall maintain these lands as forest lands and actively manage them in a sound environmental manner to provide sustainable timber harvest and revenues to the state, counties, and local taxing districts. You can find that in Oregon Administrative Rule 629, 035, 0020. And if approved, the Western Oregon State Forest Management Plan will replace the current Northwest Oregon and Southwest Oregon State Forest Management Plans, and new implementation plans will be developed to implement the FMP. I will also say there are a few scattered parcels that surround the former Elliott State Forest that we still manage. So this also will replace those parcels and that outdated plan as well. But this has nothing to do with the actual Elliott State Forest, Elliott State Research Forest. The policy context for the development of the forest management plan includes Oregon Revised Statutes. ORS Chapter 530 describes the state forester's management of both forestry and common school forest lands owned by the Department of State Lands. An Oregon Administrative Rule, OAR 629, Division 35, further defines the social, economic, and environmental benefits that constitute greatest permanent value and the planning process to achieve them. We will provide further detail on how the FMP addresses greatest permanent value later in the presentation and how ODF is using the forest land management classification system to describe our management of the forest. The geographic context of the forest management plan includes 640,000 acres of ODF managed lands west of the Cascades, of which 614,000 acres are Board of Forestry lands and 26,000 acres are common school forest lands. I think it's important to recognize that, or state that ODF recognizes that indigenous tribes and bands have been with these lands since time immemorial and continue to be a vibrant part of Oregon today. We would like to express our respect to the 9 federally recognized tribes of Oregon: the Burns Paiute Tribe, the Confederated Tribes of Coos, Lower Umpqua, and Siuslaw Indians, Confederated Tribes of Grand Rod, Confederated Tribes of Siletz Indians, Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla Indian Reservation, Confederated Tribes of the Warm Springs Reservation, the Coquille Indian Tribe, and the Cow Creek Band of the Umpqua Tribe of Indians, and the Confederated Tribes of the Klamath Tribes. We recognize and honor tribal rights and treaty rights. Their culture, ancestry, and well-being are intrinsically tied to the land. The health of one is necessary for the health of all. We recognize the pre-existing and continued sovereignty of the 9 federally recognized tribes and commit to engaging in a respectful and successful partnership as stewards of these lands. And we will uphold government-to-government relations to advance strong governance outcomes that are supportive of tribal self-determination and sovereignty. In an effort to demonstrate this commitment, we began the tribal engagement process prior to the initiating the formal rulemaking process with the Secretary of State or engaging with the public. We will continue to engage with the tribes in all of our planning and implementation processes. There is a planning requirement to review forest management plans every 10 years, and the Board of Forestry may choose to pursue revisions at any time. In this case, the reason we are pursuing a new forest management plan is a transition to a habitat conservation plan. The current Northwest and Southwest state forest management plans are not designed to work with an HCP. A key component of this mission includes providing habitat for native fish and wildlife species, including species that are listed as threatened or endangered under the Federal Endangered Species Act. As a result, ODF is also required to comply with the Federal Endangered Species Act prohibition regarding take of these listed species. There are multiple species that occur on state forests managed by ODF, including northern spotted owls, marbled murrelets, coastal martin, and several species of salmon. ODF's current approach to comply with the Endangered Species Act is to avoid take. This involves surveying specific management activities such as timber harvest operations for listed species and providing site-specific protections when individuals of a listed species are found. This process is costly and introduces considerable uncertainty and inefficiency when planning and implementing management activities. There are drawbacks to take avoidance from the conservation perspective as well. While these protections may serve to protect individual sites as long as they are occupied, it prevents long-term planning for habitat goals, resulting in conditions that are often suboptimal for listed species. Habitat conservation plans solve these problems by allowing land managers to plan for specific habitat goals without being encumbered with the restrictions associated with individual species sites. This results in more proactive and holistic ecosystem-based management and conservation, backed by focused compliance and effectiveness monitoring. Conservation strategies in the HCP avoid, minimize, and mitigate the impacts of taking of species associated with the management activities. In turn, the allowance for this incidental take provides certainty relative to the covered species that the land manager can achieve non-habitat objectives, such as timber harvest. This slide presents a simplified high-level way of visualizing the scope and scale of ODF's various planning levels. ODF's planning framework includes 3 levels. The FMP and HCP establish the policy sideboards for more detailed plans, including the implementation and operations plans. Together, these plans detail how ODF will achieve greatest permanent value. The HCP represents Endangered Species Act compliance for 17 covered species. Board adoption of the HCP and incidental take permits are their policy for state forests for managing for Endangered Species Act compliance. The Endangered Species Act compliance is a fundamental underpinning of our forest management plans. While the HCP provides direction for the 17 species it covers, the FMP sets goals for many other forest resources and constitutes Board of Forestry policy for the management of state forests to provide greatest permanent value. It is important to note that while the HCP requirements set certain sideboards for management, the FMP is the umbrella within which the HCP fits. The forest management plan goals are distilled into more specific objectives through implementation plans that are geographically discrete and time-bound. While the FMP is expected to be broad enough to function for many decades, implementation plans usually set objectives for a single decade. Each new implementation plan presents an opportunity to review previous performance and adjust. Finally, operations plans detail specific upcoming operations and projects that fulfill implementation plan objectives. Currently, we produce annual operations plans for each fiscal year. All of these planning levels are subject to their own tribal and public engagement periods. However, tribes are encouraged to provide feedback at any point in the process. Now I will highlight the engagement that we have had during the forest management plan development process to date. Tribal coordination. The indigenous peoples of this land have applied their management practices and adapted to change on the landscape that ODF currently manages since time immemorial. To date, we have conducted 6 tribal work group meetings with the 9 federally recognized tribes of Oregon to develop FMP cultural resource goals and strategies. Collaboration is ongoing and will continue as we implement the FMP over time. The Forest Trust Land Advisory Committee. We have ongoing meetings with county representatives to establish jointly with the Board of Forestry some of the goals and management strategies for these lands. Forest Management Plan meetings open to the public. We had 5 meetings between May 2021 and February 2023, with an average of 50 to 70 attendees per meeting. We had Forest Management Plan joint stakeholder meetings, 3 meetings between August and December of 2021, with an average of 20 to 40 attendees per meeting. The Forest Management Plan strategies public feedback, which was not an official public comment period, but we did solicit and received over 3,000 comments and over 300 emails providing comments on the FMP draft strategies specifically. FMP state partners engagement. We meet with our state partner agencies to review and discuss components of the FMP to make sure that we're in alignment with our other co-managing agencies. Board of Forestry engagement. Ongoing meetings with the Board of Forestry members on forest management plan components, including the goals and strategies and the management approach. More recently, we have had meetings with the Board of Forestry to also establish certain possibilities, which I'm sure a lot of you probably attended, in terms of different outcomes under the Draft Forest Management Plan and HCP. And with that, I will turn it over to Nick Palazzotto.
Thanks, Mike. Okay. Hey, everybody. I'm Nick Palazzotto, Deputy Chief of State Forests, and I'll provide a high-level overview of the components of the FMP. The draft FMP itself includes the following sections. Chapter 1 is the introduction, which describes the purpose and scope of the plan, including the guiding principles, the lands governed by the plan, and how it relates to other plans and processes. It also describes a few major plan themes that are addressed throughout the document. These themes are greatest permanent value, engaging all Oregonians, climate change, sustainability, and adaptive management. I'm not going to present chapter 1 here, but you'll see these themes woven throughout the other chapters. Chapter 2 is the management approach. This provides a vision for how the management of resources is integrated across the landscape to sustainably deliver a diverse array of benefits to Oregonians. Chapter 3 provides a description of the current condition of forest resources to provide context for management. And this chapter also includes the FMP goals and strategies for each forest resource in the planning area. And then chapter 4 contains the general guidelines for asset management, plan implementation and revision, adaptive management, and public engagement. I thought I'd take a minute just to sort of break down greatest permanent value a little bit. Greatest permanent value, defined in Oregon statute, of course, as healthy, productive, and sustainable forest ecosystems that over time and across the landscape provide a full range of social, economic, and environmental benefits to the people of Oregon. The phrase healthy, productive, and sustainable forest ecosystems places emphasis on functional systems and sustainability, which today includes consideration of climate change effects on health and productivity. Over time and across the landscape is an acknowledgement that it takes time to get there and the whole landscape is involved. A full range of social, economic, and environmental benefits is a broad mandate indeed, and it's one that requires a consideration of trade-offs at many scales. And to the people of Oregon is also a broad mandate and speaks to the importance of incorporating diversity, equity, inclusion considerations into the division's approach to forest management. This is our common ground. The board's adoption of the plan represents the board's finding that the forest management plan meets greatest permanent value. Okay, in the next few slides, I'll give a brief primer on ODF's proposed management approach under the forest management plan. So this is chapter 2. The management approach is intended to provide a vision for what management will look like across the forest during implementation, and what the public will see on the landscape when visiting the forest over time. It's a relatively high level vision for management across the forest to achieve greatest permanent value and address the other major forest management plan themes of sustainability, which includes providing a sustainable and predictable flow of timber and revenue to the state, counties, and local taxing districts. Climate change, with an emphasis on promoting resilient forests for the future. Engagement with all Oregonians, and adaptive management, which is our pathway for testing new ideas and adjusting to changing conditions. The management approach is not intended to provide instructions for implementation in the field. Those reside in the goals and the strategies in Chapter 3 or in our policies or implementation plans. What it does provide is landscape context to address how different areas are managed for different objectives, and the forest as a whole provides for greatest permanent value. And one way to think about ecosystem function and the related social, economic, and environmental benefits to people is in terms of ecosystem services. Here we use the term as described in the Millennial Ecosystem Assessment. These ecosystem services can be categorized into 4 groups, the first of which is provisioning services. These are resources that forest ecosystems provide and include goods such as food, fuel, timber, other forest products and mineral resources, and also services such as clean air and water and revenue to the state and our county partners. So just wanted to emphasize there that timber and revenue are indeed provisioning services from the system. It's also important to note that in this framework, these benefits aren't incompatible with other values or benefits. They're part of the many services that the forest provides. Next is regulating services. Forests help regulate many resources, including water, climate, and carbon. Then supporting services. Forest ecosystems support the function of many important systems and processes, including nutrient cycling, soil formation, primary productivity, and biodiversity. And finally, cultural services. Forests provide for recreational, aesthetic, spiritual, and scientific benefits and values as numerous and diverse as the people that use them. Thus, ecosystem services include all of the social, economic, and environmental benefits that are required under greatest permanent value or otherwise desired by the public, such as carbon storage and drinking water. Many of these services are recognized and embedded in greatest permanent value and reflected in the guiding principles for management plans past and present. And managing for ecosystem services provides for community well-being at local and state levels. In addition to identifying many important outcomes that contribute to well-being, community well-being rather, the concept of ecosystem services creates a framework that recognizes how social and economic needs are supported by healthy ecosystems and how society provides services to those ecosystems by supporting their functions. This diagram illustrates the reciprocal nature of our relationship to the forest ecosystem and the importance of active management, which is a key tenet of greatest permanent value, to protect, maintain, and enhance ecosystem services. So on the left side, you have ecosystem services to Oregonians, as discussed in the previous slide, and the right side lists some of the many services that humans provide to ecosystems, including cultural and natural resource stewardship, habitat restoration, pest management, and reforestation strategies. This isn't to imply that forest management is just about ecological function, but ecological function is key to the sustainable provision of the services that we desire from state forests. And this is particularly relevant within the context of climate change and promoting resilience in managed forests. So under this new draft forest management plan, we'll use what we are calling an ecologically sustainable approach to forest management. This isn't our term, it comes from existing literature, in particular a 2012 paper by an international team of scientists that frames retention forestry, which is a subcomponent of what we do within this context of ecological sustainability. The table here is adapted from their work and then modified to reflect state forest considerations. And an ecologically sustainable approach to forest management is about ecosystem services and promoting resilience to address uncertainty and risk. This approach to forest management is to sustain and support the ecological integrity and productivity of the forest, and thereby improve resilience and capacity to adapt to change over time. Key to this approach is active management for multiple values at multiple scales. This figure is intended to illustrate how ecologically sustainable forest management can be used to promote healthy, resilient, productive, and sustainable forest ecosystems by managing it across multiple scales. So on the left, we have conservation areas to ensure habitat protection and habitat function. These are distributed across the landscape in a way that improves the resilience and function of those areas. In the middle, we reference some of the other considerations for landscape management, including compositional and structural diversity. Both are important components of resilient forests, habitat connectivity, and more operational considerations, such as the location of harvest units and roads. On the right, we list some of the stand level considerations, including young stand management, harvest type, biological legacy retention, and pest management. And while these are by no means exhaustive lists, but through consideration of these multiple values at multiple scales, we work to ensure sustainable provision of greatest permanent value and the associated ecosystem services. Timber and economic benefits to local communities are ecosystem services. And in our business model, timber revenue is the primary vehicle to pay for all of the other services. This is not in conflict with the management approach. It's just important context for state forest management. Ecologically sustainable forest management can look different on different ownerships, contingent on the mandates for that ownership. Fundamental premise here is that healthy, diverse, productive, and resilient forests maintain and enhance ecosystem services and the varied benefits the public derives from them, and are the foundation upon which a sustainable working forest model is built. Specific management strategies to increase resilience to climate change and other disturbances, and the trade-offs considered, will vary across the landscape depending on the specific emphasis of particular areas, as designated by the Forest Management Plan, the Habitat Conservation Plan, the Forest Land Management Classification System, and other laws and policies. The management approach in Chapter 2 describes how strategies to improve resilience and adaptive capacity vary according to emphasis by framing it within the context of our forest land management classification system. This classification system is defined in Oregon Administrative Rule, and it's a method of describing the management emphasis of parcels of state forest land and the appropriate range of management activities that will apply to a particular area of the land base. It also identifies when a particular forest resource may need a more focused approach to its management, or possibly even an exclusive priority. This information is then used in the development of our implementation plans and during operational planning to inform our annual operations. As I said, on state forest lands, timber revenue funds the majority of management activities, and these funds are also the primary vehicle for providing economic benefits to rural communities across the state. Emphasis on production-oriented goals and related silvicultural strategies will therefore take priority on a significant portion of the landscape through time. Production of timber will be the primary objective on general stewardship lands, with consideration for long-term sustainability of the timber resource. However, it is important to note that general stewardship lands actively managed for timber also provide for other ecosystem services such as clean water, carbon sequestration and storage, and wildlife habitat. On focused stewardship lands, specific resources require heightened or focused awareness, and management strategies are designed to maintain or protect these specific resources. Examples include cultural resource and recreation sites. High-value conservation areas are intended to be managed for a specific conservation value. Habitat conservation areas and riparian conservation areas designated under the Habitat Conservation Plan are examples of these high-value conservation areas. Finally, special use areas are managed for a specific use in management activity, and management activities therein are limited to those that are compatible with that specific use. The Tillamook Forest Center and utility rights-of-way are examples of special use lands. And then the recreation, education, and interpretation program is interwoven throughout the landscape and all of the emphasis areas. The differences among the emphasis areas provide for diverse recreational activities and experiences, as well as opportunities to educate the public about sustainable working forests and functional forest ecosystems. And in this framework, the types and proportions of services that any given acre contributes to will depend on the landscape context, but the forest as a whole provides the full suite of services and demands the full suite of services that the public demands from state forests. And in this manner, the entire forest is a working forest, both in the traditional sense and within the context of greatest permanent value. This conceptual map is intended to provide a hypothetical example of how emphasis areas might look on the landscape. The figure on the left shows riparian conservation areas in blue and a habitat conservation area shaded yellow in the upper left corner. The unshaded areas represent mostly general stewardship ground managed with a timber production emphasis. Circles highlight different types of harvest units on the landscape, including regen harvest and thinning both inside and outside of the habitat conservation areas. The goals for harvest vary by the emphasis area type. The figure on the right shows how different types of recreation, interpretation, and education opportunities are dispersed across this landscape. Off-highway vehicle, hiking, and other trails are not limited to specific emphasis areas. Dispersed and traditional campsites provide both diverse and inclusive camping opportunities, and day use areas and facilities like the Tillamook Forest Center provide for interactions with interpretive and educational materials about the role of state forests, past, present, and future. Okay, that was chapter 2, and now I'll move on to chapter 3, which includes the forest resources and the goals and strategies for each. Oregon Administrative Rule for Forest Management Planning requires that the plan provides a description of the current condition of various forest resources, as well as goals and strategies for each of those listed resources. And there are 13 resources addressed in the plan and listed here. I'll summarize the goal for each and provide some example strategies in the next few slides. To define both goals and strategies, management goals are statements of what the state forester intends to achieve for each forest resource within the planning area consistent with greatest permanent value. Whereas management strategies describe how the state forest will manage the forest resources in the planning area to achieve the goals articulated therein. The strategies identify management techniques that may be used to achieve goals during implementation. Okay, I'll spend a few minutes now to walk through each of the goals. There's too many strategies for all of the goals collectively to do the same, but I'll finish with a few representative examples. I present them here, beginning with the tribal and historical cultural resource goals. The tribal cultural resource goals are rooted in shared stewardship, and staff worked with tribal representatives from the natural resources and cultural resources clusters in the government-to-government forum to develop them. The first goal directs ODF to coordinate with the federally recognized tribal governments of Oregon to provide access, availability, and enhancement of cultural resources and natural resources for their membership on state forest lands. The second goal is to identify, preserve, and protect culturally significant resources, such as archaeological and historical sites, objects and artifacts, considerations for human remains, and real property. The actual language in the Forest Management Plan provides more detail for these two goals. And then the goal for historic cultural resources is also to identify and protect them. Where am I here? I've got too many pages. Okay. Goal for recreation, education, and interpretation is to provide forest recreation, education, and interpretation opportunities to create meaningful and enjoyable experiences that foster appreciation and understanding of state forest lands and contribute to community health, sustainable working forests, and economic well-being. For scenic or visual resources, the goal is to manage forests in ways that value scenery in a range of forested settings to meet the emphasis area management objectives. And for special forest products, which include things like ornamentals, edibles, and other non-timber forest products, the goal is to provide opportunities for sustainable harvest for recreational, personal, and commercial use. For the timber resource, the goal is to provide a sustainable and predictable supply of timber that provides for economic opportunity, jobs, and availability of forest products. The transportation goal is to manage the transportation system in a manner that provides for resource protection, transportation efficiency, safety, and sound fiscal management while meeting forest management objectives. Moving on to some other resources. Permit mining, agricultural use, administrative sites, and livestock grazing when these uses are compatible with other forest resource goals. The goal for soil resources is to maintain natural soil processes, protect soils from damage, and increase soil carbon and other nutrients. And the goal for carbon is to contribute to carbon sequestration and storage on state forest lands and carbon storage and harvested wood products. For air quality, the goal is to maintain and protect healthy air quality. There are two goals for aquatic resources. The first is to protect, maintain, and enhance aquatic and riparian resources that support the life history needs of aquatic and riparian dependent fish and wildlife species. And the second is to protect, maintain, and enhance forest drinking water sources for private and domestic use. And finally, one goal for wildlife habitat, which is to protect, maintain, and enhance functional and resilient landscapes that provide the variety and quality of habitat types and features necessary for long-term persistence of all native species. And as I said earlier, there's too many strategies to detail here, but we did want to provide a few representative examples. One of the timber resource strategies is to determine a sustainable harvest objective during implementation plan development and complete this harvest objective with predictable year-to-year timber supply over the life of the implementation plan. One of several recreation, education, and interpretation strategies is to reimagine and adapt recreation, education, and interpretation across state forest lands to provide a diversity of experiences, services, and programs, improve delivery of services, and increase access. And two of the strategies for aquatic resources are to protect, maintain, and enhance aquatic habitat for aquatic and riparian dependent species, and to develop and incorporate drinking water effects analyses into planning processes to identify and protect drinking water source catchments that overlap with the planning area. Okay. Finally, we have chapter 4. This is the Forest Management Plan's guidelines chapter. And it describes the processes for how the Western Oregon State Forest Management Plan will be implemented and revised, and how the public will engage in those processes. Guidelines themselves generally describe how assets will be maintained or enhanced and how spending will be prioritized to achieve the resource management goals and strategies. Additionally, the guidelines describe plan implementation, the adaptive management planning process, plan revision process, and public engagement. Okay, and I think that's it for me. I pass it on to Justin, I believe.
Yeah. Thanks, Nick. So just a few more slides here and we'll wrap it up. So wanted to provide a little information about where we are now and where we're going in terms of the rulemaking process. So first we have to complete the actual rulemaking steps, and then we'll turn our focus onto the implementation of the forest management plan. So back in November, we began rulemaking on the draft forest management plan, which kicked off the public comment period. That public comment period concludes on January 31st. In addition to this informational meeting, we have 4 public hearings scheduled. Those are January 13th, the 15th, the 20th, and the 22nd. So next Tuesday and Thursday, and then the following Tuesday and Thursday. After the public comment period closes, we'll work to summarize all the feedback received and develop recommended changes for the forest management plan for the board's consideration as they're getting ready to adopt the final forest management plan, and we expect to do that in June. Assuming the board adopts the forest management plan as rule in June, our attention then turns to implementation of the forest management plan and developing operational plans that are consistent with the forest management plan and the habitat conservation plan. During development of the implementation plans, we will continue to request engagement from our tribal partners throughout, and that's expected to begin in winter of 2026 and conclude in June of 2027. And additionally, we'll continue to request tribal engagement as part of our annual operations planning processes. So know that that was a lot of information and a lot of material. We couldn't go into great depth, but you can find more information about the rulemaking itself, the hearing dates, all of that sort of information at this first link. I also put this in the meeting chat, so you should be able to find it there and actually have a clickable link. In addition, the second link there is information specifically about the State Forest Management Plan. There's some attachments there, some various documents that have been produced over the past few years as we've been working through developing this forest management plan. And so want to thank everyone for taking the time out of their day to attend and listen to us provide some information. So I'll go ahead and end the slideshow here and try to turn this over here for the Q&A. So just want to make sure that we're facilitating this as best as possible and give everybody a chance to ask questions. We're going to try to go back and forth if there's any written questions in the Q&A as well as any raised hands here. So we'll try to do that as best as we can. Try to limit yourself to one question at a time if there's a whole bunch of people waiting in the queue so that we have a chance for everybody to get their questions asked and answered. And of course, please be respectful of different perspectives and that sort of thing. Know that not everybody's going to see eye to eye on this kind of document. So definitely feel free to use that raise hand feature, get your hand raised. I'll go through as I'm seeing those numbered. And if you want to just type out a question, you can hit the Q&A and we will we'll go through those as well. So Michael Lang, I see you first here. Let me see, I need to give you the permissions. So you should have the ability to turn on your mic. Go ahead, Michael. Michael, are you able to unmute your mic?
Is it unmuted now? Can you hear me?
Yeah, there we go. Yeah, we can hear you, Michael. Go ahead and ask your question.
Thank you. Sorry about that, Justin. I was in the middle of thanking all of you for the presentation, your hard work, and you didn't hear any of it. So I guess I'll repeat myself. Thank you for your hard work and for the presentation. That was really helpful. Appreciate it very much. In reviewing this plan, it's, I've heard this from others. I'm struggling, like, what am I commenting on? And I went back to the rules that govern the forest management plan, and it requires the inclusion of specific goals and strategies on how the forest will be managed, right? So in going through that, it's really hard to find the real substance there within specific goals, or certainly not following the SMART model of goal setting. In the words, and I think a board member in November summed it up best, where the plan is so vague, it's essentially meaningless, the board member said, and the performance measures are all I have, end quote. So I guess the question is that, it seems the FMP is impermissibly vague when looking at the rules. The performance measures, as I understand, are not part of the FMP rule. So the question is, how does the public hold the department accountable under the law for its management of state forests? And, it appears, at least outside of the habitat conservation areas and RCAs, right, with HCP, which is 43% of the forest, it looks like a blank check to do whatever you want outside of those areas. And I would ask you to respond to that, please. Thank you.
Sure, I'll take that one. Can you hear me okay? I had to rejoin by phone.
Yep, loud and clear.
All right, so I think, first of all, it is a very high level plan. And, compared to our current forest management plan, where there are certain habitat goals expressed through the structure goals primarily, and also the aquatic and riparian strategies in our current plan, there's metrics there. And so it is a shift because all of those things are shifted into the HCP. Now, yes, so I guess to address maybe the last part of the question first, the general stewardship areas outside of the HCAs and RCAs, there are some stipulations there in the HCP. That's where you'll also find our green tree and snag requirements and down wood and so forth. So, that all resides in the HCP. Outside of those sideboards, there is a great deal of flexibility for the board to direct and the state forester to implement a variety of timber management strategies. And so, we've kind of expressed a few of those through some modeling of what that could look like, explored that space with the board and with the Forest Trust Land Advisory Committee. During our June meeting of last year and then further in November. So that's, it is meant to be flexible and last for 70 years. A good part of what you're looking for in accountability, for instance, somebody may say, well, where's the certainty around harvest? Those specific objectives around a harvest level or an intended harvest outcome will be expressed in our implementation plans, which of course there's also public comment period associated with those as well. And then we are still working with the board to fully flesh out performance measures where they can express their direction on how we implement. It's a little bit difficult in some ways for the board to express how they want us to manage the lands without being overly prescriptive. And so they do those through performance measures, the things that matter to them and the objectives that they expect to see there. And the current tack that we're taking with that is really to try and focus in on some 10-year timeframe objectives that we can then translate into implementation plans and know that we're meeting Board of Forestry intent as we implement those. Does that answer the question?
Oh, thank you for your response, Mike.
Hey,
Okay.
Michael, this is Nick Palisato. I'll just add to that. We are also accountable for the commitments within the HCP to the federal regulatory services, NOAA and Fish and Wildlife. So there's another layer of accountability there for conservation commitments.
All right. So it looks like Bob Zyback, you've got the next hand raised and the first question in the meeting chat. So either way I do it, it's your turn, Bob. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. And they're both about the same question. I've been dealing with the HCP issue since it was invented, along with spotted owls in the 90s. And I've been very concerned about it because there's been no actual scientific justification for creating these expensive conditions. The riparian areas that I've documented in the last 30 years quite often have become very shady, inaccessible for recreational access. They've become fire bombs, B&B complex. You can see right where riparian areas were left and became chimneys for fire. They become weed tubes. You can go on the Elliott and find all kinds of weeds, blackberries and grasses, exotic grasses, aligning these protected areas. So I'm very concerned with why there hasn't been historical research done on actual conditions. If we're looking at Native American occupation, the riparian areas and the ridge lines were open. regularly gathered firewood, set firewood. People occupied those areas, traveled them regularly, and yet we've planted them in with trees, and now we're calling that critical habitat. So I would really be interested in actual historical research on these areas, and I would be very interested in some type of experimental analysis of HCPs, and the Elliott would have been perfect for that. We proposed that 6 or 8 years ago and was ignored. So these HCPs and ecological systems and environmental attributes all sound nice, but they don't have any basis to them that I've been able to see. One person said that there's no way to enumerate those goals, and that's my concern. We're doing a lot of words, a lot of concepts. We're dealing with DEIs, which I thought had been removed. We're dealing with climate change, which hasn't been documented in Western Oregon over the last 500 years. And it seems to me that we're doing a lot of busy work and not getting much real work accomplished as a result. So bottom line, I think we need to do historical research on these areas. 1850s would be good. Prior to logging would be good. Prior to the Tillamook fire would be good. Prior to the 1868 fire would be good. And we haven't done those basic things to determine what we want for the future.
Okay. Mike or Nick, did you have anything to add at this point?
No, not really. I mean, I would say, just so that everybody understands, the aquatic and riparian strategies, conservation actions laid out in the HCP, what they are primarily focused on is providing what are current limiting factors for threatened to endangered species of salmonids. And those strategies were negotiated through with the services to get to where we are today. So that's how they came about.
Guess I'd add, our intent, the goal, the vision is not to recreate some past condition. We have looked at the science to inform what the historical range of variation is and how that might inform future forests, but we're managing a forest for resilience and adaptability. We're not trying to recreate something from the past.
All right. Thanks for that, gentlemen. Let's go ahead and go to Ted Messing. Go ahead, sir. You've got the floor.
How about now? Can you hear me?
We can hear you, Ted. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, given that Clatsop County is second in number of acres, Tillamook is number first, but Clatsop County is highest in money value. Why is there no in-person meetings for public testimony in Clatsop County?
So for in-person meetings, it's always very difficult to select spots that are close to everybody. We selected Tillamook to be the coastal site, Forest Grove to be the northern part of the valley site, and Eugene to represent those lands closer to those lands that we manage in southern Oregon. I would encourage everybody, however, if you're not able to attend the meeting, written comments are always a very good way to transmit your feelings to us. And in fact, a lot of times with written comments, if you have things that you want to cite in there, for instance, science, in particular, or other references that you want to include, it makes it much easier for us to reference those things in the future as part of your comments, as opposed to in the very brief time that you have the microphone at a public hearing.
All right, well, thank you.
Okay, so let's go to some of our written questions. Let's see. And actually, it looks like the next one up would be Dick Martindale, and you also have your hand up in the queue. So we'll just do double duty here. And sir, you've got the floor to ask your question. Dick Martindale, are you there? Floor is yours.
Since maybe we're having some trouble connecting with the audio. So I'll go ahead and answer the question that is in the chat, which is, will the FMP include specific language designed to protect those watersheds used for public and private drinking water sources, which should be considered as greatest permanent value, particularly from sediment and pesticides? So to the extent that the FMP does have drinking water and aquatic goals, and part of that does include that planning. At a high level, that's not necessarily prescriptive. What you'll see in our implementation plans are the considerations for those areas, both registered water rights and also public, known public drinking sources. As well. And it'll be handled in the implementation plans primarily in that respect, in terms of the amount of harvest around those areas and so forth. Also in annual operations plans, we'll address that on a site by site basis with timber sales, for instance. With respect to sediments, one of the things that we is part of our aquatic and riparian strategies in the HCP is focused on the issue of sedimentation as well. It's one of the reasons those buffers are where they are. And then also in terms of pesticides, that becomes a much more operational issue. We do tend to try to only use pesticides for initial planting, what we call site preparation prior to planting. And then also we use it to maybe as a spring release where we've had a lot of competitive growth come back. But we try to minimize our use of pesticides, and not only for environmental effects, it's also an expense and a management cost to us. As we go forward, it's really more of an operational question and adaptive management over time into how we can come up with techniques whereby we don't have to use where we can use pesticides less and less and still have reforestation success and also control of invasive species and so forth.
Awesome. Thank you, Mike. So let's go ahead and address another question out of the comments here. So what is ODF doing to hold lumber companies in compliance with the FMP and HCP goals? Can they be held accountable for causing damage to our watersheds, that is, drinking water and clean air?
So the way that our timber sale purchasers and the operators that work for those purchasers are held to account to management standards under the FMP and HCP is really through our timber sale contract. All of the things that are requirements and all of our plans and operational policies flow through to our timber sale contract. We are responsible as the land manager for laying out those operations, for planning them in a way that is compliant. And then we administer the contract and check up on operations continually throughout their execution to make sure that the contract is being followed. There are specific penalties in the contract. The expectation that all legal requirements will be followed, including the HCP, including our FMP. This plan will eventually be adopted as an administrative rule. And so that is also a legal requirement. And so we do have specific penalties for certain things they might do if they were to cut down a tree that was intended to be a leave tree, for instance. We put a very heavy price tag on that, and that helps keep that in check as well. And honestly, we actually have a very good relationship with our purchasers and operators, and we really encounter very few problems out there. They know us, they know how our contract works, they know what our expectations are, and they're actually very good at following them.
All right, thank you, Mike. Okay, so next up, we'll go back to the hands raised. And so Susan, You've got the floor. Go ahead and ask your question, please.
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. This question is actually for you, Nick. You came out to Clatsop County and gave us a tour, and I was on your tour, and it was fantastic. We got to go, I mean, the part of seeing, what was actually going to get clear cut, wasn't happy, but hearing a lot about that process was very, very helpful. My question is, how do you intend to close the gap of communication between the local residents, we the people whose forests you represent, and the local forester? The local forester out here, the district forester, is continuing to ignore that 30% mature forest goal, and nobody's doing anything about it. So I'm like, where's the chain of command here, and how does that get accounted for? So the closing that gap, and it seems like it's partly, it's a communication gap, A, and B, it's a design gap. So I'm just curious how, I mean, I can't follow all the policy speak that you speak in these documents, but just on a common sense level, how do you want to address this gap? Thank
Yeah,
you.
I mean, I'll take a crack at it, Mike, clean up whatever mess I make. But, our current plan, I think there's a big difference between the current forest management plans, conservation commitments, and how that's implemented or how it has been, and the commitments in the habitat conservation plan that then influence this draft forest management plan. The big difference is they're somewhat fixed. They're largely fixed on the landscape. Recall that the former plan had what's called a shifting mosaic, which allowed for those conservation commitments to move around the landscape through time. To varying degrees of public satisfaction at various districts and various levels of success, right? Under the HCP, we have these fixed habitat conservation area commitments. And so, and we are accountable to the regulatory federal authorities to maintaining those commitments. And in my mind, that this issue sort of goes away.
Thanks, Nick. Yeah, I would just add on to that, so in terms of the durability that some folks have expressed that they feel is lacking, it does provide the durability associated with the HCA's. It does take the floating mosaic concept back, out of this new FMP. And since those are 70-year commitments, things that are intended to go to DFs that are intended to develop into habitat, which you can consider very analogous to our current desired future condition complex, are more certain to happen on those acres. Really the only thing that keeps them from happening are exogenous effects, potentially, disturbances and so forth. And they're robust enough and large enough that it's very unlikely that all of that commitment would be taken out there. The other thing that I would say is, one of the issues with the current forest management plan, quite frankly, is the meeting desired future condition goals are not is not time bound. So when Michael Lang referred earlier to SMART goals, for instance, there really an overall time bound commitment of when we get to desired future condition. So that's always been a problem spot, if you will, in the current FMP as well. So this fixes that as well, in that there is a time bound objective associated with the growth of habitat and those projections and those goals in the HCP.
Okay, let's go back to our written questions then next. So on federal lands, there are plans to address the impact from barred owls on spotted owl populations. Does the FMP plan to address this impact on state lands in coordination with the federal agencies?
I can go ahead and take that question. So thank you, Mike, for the question. And just for everyone's awareness, my name is Vanessa Petro, and I serve as the lead wildlife biologist for the State Forest Division here at ODF. So Mike, to your question, how does the FMP plan address the barred owl piece? And so admittedly, if you think about it within the FMP in terms of all of our forest resources and goals, when it comes to wildlife, one of our strategies is a commitment to protecting, enhancing, and restoring habitat for listed species, so both threatened, endangered, and also species of concern. And then within that, in the draft FMP, as you guys have reviewed, within that includes an action that speaks to implementation of the HCP related conservation actions. So for those who aren't aware, within the Habitat Conservation Plan itself, one of our standing conservation actions referred to as strategic terrestrial species-based actions is barred owl management. So that's how the two plans are linked. And so within our commitment to implement barred owl removal, similar to the federal lands, currently we are working with other landowners who have already been permitted or in the process of seeking a permit to implement barred owl removals on their lands. And so that includes not only the Bureau of Land Management, but also recently the Elliott State Research Force. So we're hoping through collaboration, we can be more effective in implementing this strategy to benefit spotted owls, but also other native Oregon wildlife species that are either species of concern in addition to species that aren't listed or have some type of species of greatest need or conservation need based label, because we want to better understand trophic cascade effects and such. And so we're all collaborating not only again on implementation of the action, but also potential future research and monitoring opportunities that go, I would say, past, if not exceed, our commitments already in the HCP and FMP.
Great, thank you, Vanessa. Okay, let's go back to hands raised. Rachel, you have the floor. Rachel Lee Hall, if you're there, go ahead and ask your question. You'll have to unmute your mic. All right, Rachel, give you one more shot here and we'll circle back to you if you're not able to get your mic working. Okay, no problem. I'll leave your hand up and we'll circle back to you here in just a moment. In the meantime, we did have a question in the Q&A about confirming the yearly harvest goals, percentage goals of timber sales, and that may form a follow-up question. So just want to provide a little context there that the forest management plan itself does not establish a harvest level, and the Board of Forestry, who approves the forest management plan, is actually by statute not allowed to set an annual harvest objective. So the harvest levels are set in our implementation plans. We've been doing some modeling and developing some ideas on approaches and how those will result in various levels of harvest. And so we can speak to that process, but we won't be able to, really provide a definitive answer about a timber harvest goal in terms of volume in the forest management plan. So, Mike, what's your thought on how you would provide some context around harvest levels with that in mind?
I think, the best that we can really do to understand what harvest levels will be under this FMP is to, perhaps go back and review what we were looking at the most recent November Board of Forestry meeting. And this was after several scenarios had been modeled. exploratory scenarios modeled for the Board of Forestry and the Forest Trust Land Advisory Committee to better understand what those outcomes might be. And where the direction is really pointing, even though they did not, want to put any kind of a performance measure or hard expectation on there, we did end up with a scenario that still focuses on what we call harvesting around the accumulation of mean annual increment. And so that is when the trees themselves start to slow in growth, which typically for us, depending on the site class that you're on, how well the trees are growing on an individual piece of ground, and depending on whether we thin them, which we have included those in those silvicultural strategies of doing a thinning prior to a final harvest, would put a final harvest of most stands anywhere between 70 and 90 years old as a rough gauge. So that's sort of like what the timber management strategy would still look like unless we were given other direction. There has been no indication from the board that they would want to direct us to pursue a more aggressive harvest strategy that would push for a younger rotation age. So I think we're probably in the general stewardship landscape still looking at that. And so the outcomes of volumes there where they are just kind of depends on the growth, quite frankly, that we can get off of there. Yeah, so that's that. It's a little bit hard to really wrap up, but that's kind of what it looks like.
All right, thank you, Mike. So yeah, if there's a
I don't know if Pauline or anybody had anything to add to that.
Seems not. So all right. So Guy, you asked that that question in chat. So if you do have a follow-up, go ahead and get your hand raised or type out your question there, and we'll try to answer the more pointed question should you have one. So let's go back, see if Rachel, are you able to join us? You have the floor. If you can unmute your mic. Rachel? Okay, I'll leave your hand up there, Rachel, but we're going to keep moving along. Bob Zyback, you've got the floor once more. Go ahead and ask your question.
Thank you. It's the same question as before. I didn't get a very definitive answer. The thing I'm asking is an HCP even required, or is this something that we're choosing to do for an 80-year period? And then that brings in the problem with low grade. And HRV isn't historical research. It's just kind of an overview, a modeling tool. I'm very, very interested in actual historical research, because we get told that you're not trying to recreate a past environment, but we're trying to save species that live in the environment, and we're trying to restore habitat. And those are words that have a lot to do with history. And so I'm very curious about two things. One, is an HCP actually required by law, or is that something we're undertaking on our own initiative? And two, why haven't we done legitimate historical research on the land as far as wildfire, human use, weeds, endangered species? There's a lot of information that is missing as we're moving into an 80-year lockstep. And those are my two concerns. And I hope Rachel gets back on. I'm sure she's going to talk about forest under stress, but I think she's probably having trouble with her microphone.
So I'll take the first part of that question in terms of the legal requirement for an HCP. So what is legally required is that we follow the Endangered Species Act, both the federal and the state Endangered Species Act. There's really just two mechanisms for landowners to be able to do that. One is through take avoidance, where you survey, and if there's a site, you protect it. That is one, it's very expensive. But number two, it just results in headaches. You've got your stuff planned out. You think you know where you're going, and up pops a threatened and endangered species site that you then have to apply protection policies around. It makes planning a lot more difficult. It isn't very useful for conservation either, because you're simply chasing species sites across the landscape, if you will, as they either become occupied, or then if you have no evidence of occupancy after some time, you may choose it's a low risk of take to go in there and do an activity, that kind of thing. Whereas an HCP does provide a legal mechanism by which we say, okay, here are the areas where we're going to provide these protections. Here's the strategies by which we're going to provide protections for these particular species. And it recognizes right up front that outside of those protections, you're going to take species. You actually have license to take in, species incidental to otherwise legal activities like timber harvest. So it gives the assurance to the landowner that we know where we're going to be able to operate. It gives the assurance on the conservation side that we know what our conservation commitments are, and they don't simply, float across the landscape, if you will. So in that way, it's a very planful way that is beneficial for both the regulators and for the landowner. And I think what I'll do is I'll turn over, because I think I've got some better experts in the room to speak to historical conditions on a species by species basis, or sort of all species together, if you will.
Well, but before you guys chime in, I guess some clarification, because I'm not sure I understand the question. Are you saying, have we done retrospective analyses, or have we looked at existing literature with retrospective analysis? The latter, yes, absolutely. The former, we are not a research agency, we're a management agency. Like, we facilitate research and occasionally fund research on our lands, but that's not our, like, in our mandate per se. I mean, so I guess what research do you want us to be doing or looking at?
Well, that's the point. When the Tillamook burn burnt, and you've got a lot of that land, scientists from Oregon State University joined with ODF and collaborated on an understanding of what needed to be done. And at that time, it was a matter of removing the snags because they're flammable and keep burning. So those snags were seen as a hazard at that point. And then planting, and I did it as a high school student, and other people did. And now we've got a national or a state forest, and it's got a contiguous canopy, and we're trying to create these artificial habitats that we're assuming are going to be beneficial to the animals, although salmonids and spotted owls haven't been really responding to those creations. So my concern is a lack of actual research into the role of people in the landscape. We're talking about working with the tribes. Well, how did the tribes operate within the landscape 200 years ago? What was the landscape actually like to keep it from having catastrophic wildfires and supporting whatever wild animals you want? And if there's like barred owls, maybe they're moving in, maybe they're just ephemeral, maybe they're not an 80-year part of the landscape. So my concern is a lack of real understanding of the interrelationship of people and the landscape, and a commitment, an artificial commitment to an 80-year time frame that supposedly will be helping endangered species that we've just named within the last couple decades. So it's a very costly, very complex undertaking, and I don't think it's got a good foundation in information.
Yeah, I'm not sure I agree. I'd argue it's rooted in 40 years of both forest management and wildlife conservation research in the Pacific Northwest, and reflects the state of the art. And snag removal wasn't necessarily a science-based decision. That's a management decision. Vanessa wanted to chime in though.
Thank you, Nick. And just again, for the record, Vanessa Petro, I serve as the lead wildlife biologist for our division. And so, Bob, I hear you and I understand your question and also your concern. And just to make sure we're all on the same page and caught up to speed here. So I totally hear you and recognize, the value and better understanding disturbance history as it relates to forest development in this region, particularly within the FMP plan area. And so one thing to consider is there's a lot of recent research that's been coming out of OSU's College of Forestry relative to stand development histories and fire histories, primarily in Southwestern Oregon, according to the publications, but also up and coming in both the Oregon Coast Range and also within the Cascades ranges of not only Oregon and in Washington. So to Nick's earlier point, we are involved in some of that research, particularly, having our lands be, serving as potential plot sites for data collection for the various researchers. And so that's a lot of ongoing research that we're still involved in and getting, updates in terms of preliminary results and final results as they are available to be shared out. And in particular, when it comes to a lot of the recent research that's being led through Oregon State University, particularly if we think about our habitat conservation plan, our covered species, there's a lot of recent research interest in pursuit of better understanding not only stand development trajectories as they relate back to cultural and both natural disturbances. So that cultural getting at that historic fire piece tied to tribal entities. And so thinking about how those disturbances shape the trajectories of these different stands, but more importantly, and again, this is tying the FMP to the HCP, is better understanding how those disturbances provided the conservation features that we seek to enhance and restore and develop on it. So we're thinking about not only those large diameter trees, but also structural features with those trees, including, enhanced canopy and limb development. And the limb development is a big one if you think about nesting platform or marble mallets, which of course are one of our covered species. So I would argue we're involved, but that science itself is still an evolving research in itself. And so we are tracking that, but to Nick's earlier point, at this point in time, there's no established baseline period that we're trying to target with these plans moving forward. But we are trying to use the best available science to inform our decision making moving forward to get those features that we desire. So hopefully that clarifies.
Yeah. All right, Mike, did you have something to add?
No, I was just going to say, I think I believe you said you have Rachel's question, even if she can't unmute. Thank you.
Yep. So yeah, let's keep rolling along here. Bob, definitely feel free to rejoin the queue if you want to have some additional questions there. But want to make sure we're getting through.
And let's make sure if you're not speaking currently that you're muted. There's some interference coming through across the board.
Yes, thank you for that. So yeah, Rachel said she can't get her mic to open, but she did have a chance to type it up here. So she says, my question is on HCP. Is there a top 5 or criteria of importance of the 17 federally listed species that would require more intervention in the HCP landscapes that would be costly or more time consuming to implement with funding? So I think the thrust of it basically is top 5 or criteria of importance of the 17 federally listed species in terms of who needs the most attention and the most resources.
I think that so at the base level, and the habitat conservation areas were designed to cover a number of species. The one species that occurs throughout the permit area that is kind of a bedrock of the HCA's is the spotted owl. But, and all the rest of the species that are involved there, the terrestrial species occur in portions of the permit area. But the HCA's are intended to address all of those species within those portions of the area. So that's a base commitment, and that commitment doesn't change under the HCP. That's one of the nice things about it. There's a no surprises piece. The federal agencies can't really come in and ask. Well, they can ask. They can't demand more, like bigger HCA's or less management within HCA's and so forth. There is the adaptive management component. We may find out that things are going really well with some of our strategies or not so well with some of our strategies, and we can tweak and adjust them. But basically, there is a cost limitation there, if you will. When it comes to some of the other things that are involved and where we target activities, we do establish under the HCP a conservation fund, which is basically just an earmark on our own budget for where we will target some of those monies. And currently, we expect that it would be somewhere around $1 million a year, maybe a little less. Then that all depends on actually harvest volume, because it is tied to harvest volume in that sense. So the more harvest there is, it's $5 per 1,000 board feet of timber harvested. All right, and so that conservation fund is divided ultimately kind of equally between watershed restoration projects, which could span, anything from putting wood, deliberately into the system. And typically these would be around some of the larger watershed restoration projects that are more expensive to do, floodplain reconnections and those types of things. But then half of that money also is for terrestrial work. So for instance, barred owl management and so forth would be expended out of that as well. So when we talk about some targeted things, those are the two main targeted things that I can think of that are for particular species out of the 17. And Nick, do you have anything to add about the conservation fund commitments there?
No, I think you covered it well.
All right. Okay, so we have one hand up. Michael Lang, go ahead. You've got the floor.
Thanks, Justin. It's come up a couple times. The current management plan requires 30 to 50% of the forest to be in complex layered or older forest conditions. And along with that, adopted about 15 years ago as a key performance measure adopted by the legislature, requiring a minimum of 30% of the forest in the North Coast to be in complex layered condition. I think the ODF reported last year that it was at 11.75% after 15 years. And I know some modeling changes have been made too. But so with the new management plan, that is going away from what I've been told, and the reliance will be on the HCP, and the HCA's and RCA's to provide that. So, and then complex layered forests outside of these protected areas will be harvested, as I've been told. So the question is, when will the ODF achieve that minimum of 30%, relying on the HCPs and RCA's? Understanding that the RCA's and HCA's contain some non-habitat, some recent clear cuts. And if you don't know the answer, can the ODF model that to determine when it will achieve those minimum requirements that are currently in place? Thank you.
So I don't know if we have those numbers at our fingertips here. Colleen can shake her head if not. I'm sure that we have those numbers somewhere. And so I think maybe we could have a conversation outside of this meeting. We can talk about how to best get that to you. We know where all of the, we do have the structure calls from the current inventory, and it's just a matter of selecting those that are in HCA's. And I know that our modeling, our modeling is targeted on habitat. If you were to use that habitat as a surrogate, we can use the HSI values to sort of, get an idea of when we would achieve those targets within HCAs as well. And I'm sure that's in some of our published materials somewhere where we've estimated habitat accruement over time.
Colleen, did you have?
Yeah, I
Thank
can
you.
add a little bit to this. My name's Colleen Kaiser. I'm the planning manager for State Forests. So the key performance measure that Michael's talking about, does have a target of 30% in current condition complex on the North Coast districts over time. So it was definitely not a time bound. It's not something that we had ever intended on reaching today, but it is over time. And in the locations that the desired future condition was being placed on. So areas outside of that were currently in complex were available for harvest under our current forest management plan and our implementation plans. And the intention was to grow those areas in the right location to desired future condition in the future. The modeling that we've done for our implementation plans in the past for the current forest management plan, for each district, it describes how long that intention was it for it to take in those locations. As we go into our new forest management plan, frankly, that we don't have desired future condition. That's a component of our current forest management plan, the language of our current forest management plan. So unless we're directed to follow through or to add that back in, that would sunset with our current forest management plan. And then our new rules would be implementing the new habitat conservation plan and really focus more on the habitat components versus the desired future condition of the stand. So just wanted to add that in.
Thanks,
Thank you, Colleen. And if I could rephrase the question. I understand that it wasn't time bound in the KPM, nor was it in the current management plan, but the ODF has actually gone backwards and further away from achieving that goal. And the question is, now under the new management plan, when will that minimum goal be achieved? And can you model that for the public to give some understanding that this is serious and that you intend to achieve that goal? Is that better?
It does. Yeah, Michael,
Thank you.
thank you for the clarification. So if it is determined that that is a goal that the Board of Forestry wants to pursue under this plan, because that hasn't been established yet, right? We're really focused on habitat and habitat improvement. And so if that 30% of complex structure becomes a goal, then yes, we would determine what that baseline is at the start of our implementation plan, and then we would show and be transparent during those implementation plans of here's what's our expected outcome over the 10-year period, and then be held accountable to those numbers as we go forward. So it just depends if that becomes a performance measure that we're going to continue to work forward in the next plan, or a KPM in the next plan.
A little additional context there, I suppose. The framework for conservation of older forest structure, of complex forest, under the new plan is really tied to the HCP commitments and the habitat conservation areas. And then to be clear about what that commitment is, there's some 270,000 acres therein, including the riparian conservation areas therein. So that's some like 43% of the forest or something is in these habitat conservation areas. And they are intended to go to old forest unless they get disturbed in between, in which case we may tinker, but it's still the trajectory is old forest habitat within the entirety of the habitat conservation areas. We can tell, yes, we can model when we think we start to achieve, like at what point it fills in, and to like the rate at which it's filling in. We can provide data for that, but it's a different question, is my point, with a different objective. The objective being you have these acres, grow them out into old forest. Very different from have 30%, but it can move around the landscape.
Thank you. I think it's best if I follow up with you later, Nick and Mike and Colleen. Thanks so much for your response.
All right, thank you, Michael. So we've got a couple more questions in chat. So we'll go back there. We have a question. As a follow-up question, with all forests in Oregon experiencing record destruction, not by fire, 3.5% increase over 2024, would you agree? How are those numbers being accounted for in the management plan, especially over a 70-year stewardship period? Does this impact management plan? If so, explain, please. So there, I think we're talking about landscape resiliency and the insect and disease, overall forest health sort of factors, it seems, not fire.
So, yeah, that's a pretty big question. One of the things, so adaptive management is an underpinning of both the forest management plan and the HCP. So when we talk about changing conditions that are having a deleterious effect on our forests, we certainly intend to address those. We'll be speaking to some of that in the FNP. We know we're going to get a lot of comments to that. We need to beef those sections up a little bit in some descriptive fashion. I think those largely end up being, exactly what we're going to do about particular things end up being pretty operational decisions, pretty site-specific decisions in a lot of cases, or best practices changes. For instance, changes in reforestation methodologies to help deal with drought conditions and so forth. So those will show up in different places in terms of the specifics there. I think primarily in implementation plans, you'll see those strategies start to be lined out. And then some of it actually goes all the way down into operational policy that we do just within the division. For instance, when we talk about our reforestation methodologies, what's required of us as a non-federal landowner in Oregon is to meet the Forest Practices Act reforestation requirements so that we don't have failure in reforestation. However, there's a number of ways probably to get there. And I'd like to say too, we're not really the only ones looking at this. We're looking at this with a lot of other landowners. A lot of other landowners are interested in things ranging from lowering planting densities to the species mix that they are planting, to assisted migration of helping move species north, if you will, as conditions change, or trying to respond to specific drought conditions or other things. And then, of course, there's a variety of insect and disease problems as well. One of the major ones we battle, of course, is Swiss needle cast. We've accommodated that to some degree in the HCP, and specifically calling out some of those treatments within HCAs that need to happen because they're not going to go to habitat all on their own because of the very poor condition of those stands. They're very, very stagnant. But things like that. But those will really play out in implementation plans, which are and operational plans as they come out. And Colleen, I see you pop back on, so if you got something to add there, please.
Oh, no, I think you got there. I just wanted to be here if there was any follow-up on there.
I just add there's a performance measure and some sub metrics. Tyson could correct me on the language there around adaptive capacity and demonstrating to the board how we're improving the adaptive capacity of the forest through time. And the planting regimes and growth rates are a big component of that.
Okay, thank you for that. We have one last question here, it looks like. Seems like we're winding down. Rachel followed up on her question about the implementation prioritization of the 17 species. And so in the context of that response, she stated there could be a skewing of the balance addressing landscapes with cost effectiveness and rob one species to protect another. Would the barred owl rob from other funding in this area?
Good question. I don't believe so. We've sort of obligated and earmarked specific funds for the barred owl piece. So it's a really good question. And yes, like there will be a push and pull among the different commitments for the funds that are available, aquatic restoration versus barred owl management, et cetera. Yes, it is something we will have to navigate. I don't know that it would occur to the detriment of any other species, though. Mike looks like he wants to say something. We wouldn't let it occur to the detriment.
Yeah, there are those baseline commitments, to which end there wouldn't be a detriment per se. But yeah, I mean, realistically, just in any financial situation, you have so much money that you can expend. And so there's always going to be some push and pull as to perhaps which species get the most attention. I think what it really comes down to is what are the most severe limiting factors for a particular species, and what's the time frame in which they need to be addressed.
Right. Thank you, gentlemen. Okay, so we've got some.
One more thing on that. We do have an HCP administrator who's going to be sort of navigating that and bringing people to bear on that discussion every given year. And so it's not going to, we're going to be looking at that balance every single year.
All right. Okay, so going back to hands raised, Bob, you're first up in the queue. Go ahead.
Thanks. I have a quick yes and no question, and I want to follow up briefly on what Colleen had said. When you say barred owl management, are you talking about systematically shooting barred owls? Is that what that means?
Yes.
Okay. And then with what Colleen said, she said that you don't have a desired future condition in your management plan anymore. You've gone entirely over to modeling habitats. And I've got real concerns about that. You've got a forest that's been subjected to the Tillamook fires, to the Columbus Day storms, dramatic changes to massive amounts of the real estate. And I'm wondering, with all of these little polygons you got in different routines, what you have in the plan. I really think a desired future condition should be tantamount, but what you have in the plan to respond to catastrophic destruction of the forest, because it's a matter of historical fact that it occurs from time to time.
It might be a little bit of a semantic thing, and the way we use that phrase desired future condition in our current management plan is very specific. And so, Colleen, if I'm speaking for you, when we're not saying we have no desired future condition, we're saying those commitments of the current plan go away.
Yeah, it was a very specific term. And generally, the areas that the HCAs are in, the location of where we want to grow older habitats over time, is kind of the crosswalk between the two plans. So the desired future condition was something that we use in our current forest management plan. And now that habitat conservation areas really are the proxy of that, or the equivalent of that in the new plan, and the habitats that occur there.
Okay.
I mean, we get the management approach describes the desired future condition of the landscape. It may not use that phrasing. I remember arguing with staff internally, like, "Hey, other folks use this phrase a different way," and we didn't. I don't remember if we got there or not.
Okay. Susan, you have your hand raised. Go ahead.
Hi, it's a follow-up question. What does the FMP have a specific plan for communicating with local people? So, when I go to the website, it's very dense. It's hard to get through. It's hard to understand the language. Do you have in your plan a way to connect with the people themselves, those of us who live in and around these forests? Because communication is essential to people-powered understanding of the management of our forests. So what would you say is your plan for that? Can it be built into your plan specifically, not just a general, we plan to communicate, but specifically at the local level? What would that look like, or can that be built into your plan? That's my question. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that question. And so a specific comms plan of that nature will not be in the forest management plan. There's the goal around being inclusive of all Oregonians in that plan and in the plan, and making sure that people are engaged at the different planning levels, FMP, uh, implementation plans and operational plans, so that we have those periods of comment. The criteria around more direct outreach to adjacent landowners and making sure that we're inclusive there. We've taken some steps there to make sure that the folks that live closest and in some ways are certainly most affected by operations that are carried out under these plans, that they are include that we do make sure we reach out to them and make them aware of things that are upcoming. I'd say that process is definitely still evolving. We've started to make some improvements with that, and I think it's a matter of having it evolve at an operational level. And so where I really see that coming for us is more in our operational policies and making sure that we're being that we are communicating early and often with all the right people as we go forward. So yeah, that's how we will approach that in the future.
All right, thank you, Mike. Pam, you have your hand raised. Go ahead, please. Pam, if you're able to hear us, please unmute your mic. You have the floor. Pam, if you're there, please unmute.
Okay, got it.
There we go. Okay.
Yep, I was trying the wrong thing. What will the new FMP and the department do to address and protect non-registered domestic water sources? And that includes shallow wells. There's all sorts of water systems out here in the woods, probably thousands, and a lot of those have been handed down generation to generation, and they aren't registered. How will the department protect their domestic water source?
So I think I'll let Colleen pile on to this one after I kind of open it up. I think that so that's always, we know what we know, right? So part of the plan, part of the reason that we have the annual operations plans, and we want to make sure that we're reaching out to adjacent landowners that are most effective, is there might be some of those things out there. Now, of course, we would always encourage people to get their points of diversion registered. That is super important for a whole variety of reasons, because we're not the only ones out there managing, right? But beyond that, that's an important point for us to be able to know, for folks to communicate to that. Hey, I've got something out here. It's not registered, but it's, really important to me. And that way we can start to build it into our planning. We can see, okay, what do we need to do here? What sort of protections can we provide, and that sort of thing. And that really gets down to, it could happen to some degree at an implementation plan level. However, we're not going to have all the operations lined out of like where stuff is exactly going to be over that 10 years. So it's probably mostly an annual operations plan sort of a thing for Colleen's team to look at. And Colleen, you can correct me if I'm wrong or add on there.
No, I think you're exactly right, Mike. I said, the first I would encourage anyone with unregistered to work with OPR or the Water Resources Department to get those identified. I think that that's, it's something we check it regularly, we check it often. When we're going through the annual operations process each year, one of the reasons that we've done a lot of the updates we've had is so people really can zoom in on areas or the areas that they live in or that they live adjacent to. So that way we can get notified through the public comment process of those things. We read each one of the comments we receive individually, and we flag those ones that have this type of information in it. So that way we can work with the districts to ensure that we get out on the ground to look at those things. So I think those are probably the two biggest pieces that we can communicate through that process is getting them registered and then making sure that you're looking for, sales that are in those areas. So that way we can be notified if there are unregistered ones out there.
All right, thank you. So we have another question in chat. Did you coordinate your HCP reserve areas with Northwest? Whoops. Got to chat right over the question as I was trying to read it. With the Northwest Forest Plan late successional reserves, primarily on the Tillamook and Santiam state forests and adjoining BLM and U.S. Forest Service lands.
So I was asking Vanessa if she wanted to take it, but she apparently has a contractor vacuuming in the background. So I will take it. Like not directly, but we have their data. And so we took their data for stand ages and species occupancy into account as we were designing ours. Many of our habitat conservation areas on our smaller districts are basically blocked up with habitat on fedlands, meaning there was an owl site on fedlands that spilled over onto us, and so we put a habitat conservation area to cover for that owl or for that known murrelet occupied area that's on federal lands next door. So we took their data into account. We didn't like sit down and design the conservation areas with them. And they do reflect the conservation on their lands, adjacent lands.
Right. Okay, so we don't have any hands raised, have no questions in chat or in the Q&A. We were planning to adjourn here in about 8 minutes, so we'll give just another moment here. Last minute, raise your hand if you have any last minute questions.
Justin, I don't know if we wanted to go back and reference a couple of the things that Eric put in the chat that I don't know that everybody has actually seen.
Oh, sure.
But yeah, so Eric, did you want to read those directly or?
Yeah, I can do that. Let me find them real quick.
I think the first one was about drinking water sources and sediment.
Okay. I just wanted to let the group know. Hi, for the record, this is Eric Moberly, Aquatic and Riparian Specialist. I just wanted to share with the group. I'm trying to find what I wrote. But in regards to sediment and drinking water, I just wanted to let the group know that ODF has committed to a number of best management practices to protect waters of the state, which include, disconnecting roads and trails from the waters of the state, and then adhering to specific standards regarding road and trail locations, design, maintenance, and decommissioning. And second, Nancy provided a comment regarding waterway evaluations. And I wrote in the chat that ODF&W has developed new stream survey protocols that require surveys to be done during the appropriate time frames, so fish presence and flow permanence, i.e. seasonal or perennial data, is more accurate based on what is typically found on the landscape during normal water years. And then those data are used to provide protection measures for natural resources. Thanks, Mike, for letting me share those comments to the group verbally.
Yeah, thank you, Eric. Okay. So, no hands went up and no questions were asked in the meantime. Oh, never mind. One more. Eric, thank you for responding to the sediment question. What about pesticides?
So pesticides is a little out of my wheelhouse, but we do follow Forest Practices Act requirements for pesticide application, both through aerial spray and ground spraying. If anybody else has any additional information.
No, I think that's about the extent of it, including, what we talked about earlier and how we certainly try to limit the use of pesticides to what we really herbicides to what we really actually have to do out there. And also, like I said, a lot of landowners are looking at this just because of the cost of doing it as well, not only the environmental impact. So I actually think that'll be a really growing an area of best management practices changing sort of across ownership over the coming years, for sure.
Okay. Well, not seeing other questions. I see people are starting to drop off in large numbers here. So I think we've accomplished our mission here of sharing some information and answering some questions. Again, we have public comment opportunities coming up in the coming weeks. So if you'd like to submit any formal public comments, please do so. You can email those and you can send those by postal mail. However they come to us, as long as they come to us on time, they will be included in the official rulemaking record. So rest assured that if you want to provide comment and you do so before the comment period closes, that those will be included and given to the board. So, even if we're not able to come to your community individually. So, okay. So with that, we'll go ahead and adjourn the meeting. Thank you again for everyone taking the time. Thank you, staff, for also taking time out of your day and sharing your knowledge and your expertise. And with that, we'll go ahead and end this webinar. Thanks, everyone.